Ahora tenemos el enorme grado de presentar al siguiente grupo de estudiantes. Araya, Javier Barrera y Winston Vergara. Ellos son estudiantes de cuarto año del programa de licenciatura en Lengua y Literatura Inglesa de la Universidad de Chile. Y cursan el seminario de grado de lingüística cognitiva impartido por el profesor Giorgos Iván. Lo dejamos con su ponencia Conceptual, metaphorical metaphors, towards a degree of metaphoricity. Por favor, recibamos un aplauso.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. We are here on behalf of the whole seminar group, and we're currently working on cognitive linguistics, especially cognitive semantics. And what is interesting for us is the study of metaphors. So, why metaphors, you would say? Well, according to Lakoff and Johnson, metaphor is pervasive in our everyday life, and not just in language, but also in thought and action. So we can say that metaphor is not necessarily present just in literary language, but also in everyday language. And Evans and Green make the relation that if our conceptual system is metaphoric, then it is obvious that our language is going to be metaphoric as well. We can prove this with an example. If you ask me, oh, how are you doing? And I just do this, or this, or this. You would understand what I say, because we understand good or bad on a vertical scale. So that is a metaphoric process. For the sake of this presentation, we will make a distinction between metaphor and metonymy. And we understand metaphor as an as-if relation. And we have two different domains. And metonymy as a through relation, and in which one concept between of the same domain stands for other of the same domain, as you probably saw in Professor Giorgos' presentation. So the basis for our thesis is the conceptual metaphor theory by Lakoff and Johnson, which is basically that we, in order to create a metaphor, we have two conceptual domains, a source domain and a target domain. The source domain serves for the basis that we have to explain another concept. So it also follows the idea that we want to understand abstract concepts in terms of a concrete concept. So therefore, we would say that this source domain is a concrete domain, which is tangible, and the target domain is abstract. So that's why we have metaphors such as time is money, in which we say you don't waste your time, or you need to invest some time, and also life is a journey. But one thing that they say is that this is a unidirectional process. It goes from source to target. So we couldn't say journey is a life. This journey is a life. That would be like not possible in terms of Lakoff and Johnson. But Faulkner and Turner saw that unidirectionality is not everything that's two metaphors. So they extend this theory of conceptual metaphor and also of mental spaces, and they say that actually meaning construction is a conceptual integration. And they propose the model of the conceptual integration network model. So this is basically that we have three types of spaces. We have the input spaces, which are the source domain and target domain. We have the generic space, in which elements that are counterparts in both domains meet. And finally, we have the blend, which is the metaphor. For example, we have this movie is a joke, when movie is the target domain and joke is the source domain. So we will have those two here, and basically we would see that they have some common things, like they are used to entertain, so we're going to find some counterparts. And then the blend says that this is a bad quality movie. This is the idea that they propose. But also abstract and concrete domains is not everything to it, because we have concepts that are on the same level. For example, this surgeon is a butcher, and this butcher is a surgeon, in which you in both cases you highlight their activities and their skills, and then in the surgeon is a butcher, you have a surgeon that is pretty bad surgeon which mutilates their patients. And the butcher is a surgeon. You have this very neat and precise butcher which cuts the meat in a very nice manner. So, well, Cuvitches is another important author for our thesis, and he also agrees that there are concepts that are abstract and others that are concrete. So he proposes a list of concepts that are common sources and targets. And he says that this must be a unidirectional process. So we have as acceptable the ill society that we live in, but we do not live in a society of illness, because we cannot understand concrete in terms of abstract. So, but other thing that is important from Cuvitches that we need to highlight is the fact that he says that some concepts that serve of source have a rather wide scope. This means that if you have a word, this word can be mapped onto different other words. For example, joke. Everything can be a joke. This movie is a joke, this dinner is a joke, this wedding is a joke, my wife is a joke, everything. So that is the main idea, and we ask ourselves what happens with the target. Does the target have any important role in the process of selection? And we find that Barton and his colleagues, that are cognitive computer scientists, say that there is actually a reverse transfer process in which the target selects something of the source. For example, we have movie, understood in terms of joke. But people don't select the fact that movies are long, that have actors, that you spend money on producing them. People select the fact that it has a bad quality. So they say that there is a bidirectional process of mutual selection in metaphors.
This is where things become really interesting, and where it became interesting for us in particular, because at one point our friend Javier came up with the idea of turning this primary metaphor around. So instead of saying this surgeon is a butcher, what would happen if we turn this around? Do the concepts remain in an analogous, symmetrical relation to one another, or does something change just because of the fact that one has been now selected as the source and the other as the target in relation to the previous combination? So what we did with the whole seminar group was that we did a recombination of several common concepts that were used as sources and targets, and we just mixed them up, and we tried to see what we, as a group, interpreted from each of those metaphors. And what we found was, incredibly, that the pattern of answers was not at all convergent. So it's not the same when you have a very entrenched, that is to say, a very frequent metaphor that everybody understands always in the same way. Then you turn it around, and then suddenly you see that the answers are very, very divergent, and there must be a reason for that. So, and we identified that there are different mechanisms for achieving the interpretation of these metaphors, which are those there, but let's explain them in a little bit more detail. So, for example, we have types of interpretations, such as the metaphorical link that you can make between two concepts, such as life is a fight, which is interpreted as la vida tiene dificultades que hay que vencer. So again, this is one term as if another. Then the metonymic lip, this code is affection, is interpreted as el abrigo es un regalo. In this case, the code remains a code. It is not interpreted in terms of anything else, but rather affection is understood as in replacement of a gift. Then we have something that came up very commonly, which was the inversion. So the original metaphor here was this answer is a bullet, which apparently everybody tended to understand in a very convergent way. Everybody sort of understood the same idea. But when you turn it around, it turned out that you interpret the same original metaphor, not the one inverted. Then we have the literal interpretations. So in this case, this trap is a job. Esta trampa, tomó mucho trabajo. Nothing is interpreted in any other way. So the trap remains a trap. The job remains a job. And finally, the collapse of interpretation when, with the same prompt as before, this bullet is an answer. Some people just didn't find any relation and simply could not interpret the metaphor?
Well, taking as a base our preliminary experiment, we draw the following hypothesis. The interpretation of metaphor is constrained by a bidirectional process that takes place between the target and the source. On the one hand, we have the source having a schematizing potential over the target, and the target, on the other hand, having an active role in the selection of common elements within the source domain matrix. This is very complex, but I'm going to explain it with a drawing. This is a UFO acting as the source. This UFO has a wide scope over over concepts. Then we have a target, a child, looking at the UFO and acting as a source, selecting features of the source. Again, we have the actual interplay between target and sources. Here we have the example of this wife. This wife is a viper. We have the viper being the source, which has many concepts related, which are related with invertebrate, venomous, slithers, long. And the wife taking just one aspect of the viper is not a wife who is invertebrate. No, it's a wife being long. No, but venomous.
So finally, from these analyses, we came to different sub-hypotheses, which actually constitute a large part of what we are proposing, which is the something that we are proposing, which is the degree of metaphoricity, which might be a direct product of the way in which the source and target concepts align themselves. And what we hope to find is that there is a scalar effect that applies to several specific features that are both in the source and the target, and in the interpretation of them, and in the metaphorical interpretations of them, which are, first of all, the convergence of interpretation, that is, among people, then the mechanism of interpretation, which we're going to see a little bit of later, then we have the level of schematicity of the source and target domains, which are given to begin with, and finally, the difficulty that this represents for people when they try to interpret a metaphor. This would in turn lead us to reinterpret the notion of entrenchment, not only as which metaphors are more used than others, but rather which metaphors have identical metaphoric responses.
So, for the sake of time, we're going to skip some of the slides. This you can explain.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so these are the scales that we were talking about before. First of all, we have the level of schematicity of the source and target domains, which can range from single schematic to patronymic and image schematic. Then we have the difficulty of interpretation, which is reported by the people who participate in the experiments, which goes from very easy to very difficult. Then the convergence of interpretation, which is only a way of seeing whether everybody interpreted something in the same way or everybody along different paths, and which are those paths if they exist at all. And finally, the thing that interests us in particular, which is the type of interpretation, which goes either from the metaphorical conceptual integration of both concepts to absolutely no interpretation because people do not perceive that there's anything to interpret, that the relation is impossible.
So we want to share with you some of the answers you gave us. We have here, la mujer es una estafadora, for the viper is a trap. This movie is a wife, terrible fome la película. This wife is a joke, la esposa no cumple con los quehaceres de la casa. This symphony is a thorn, no puedo sacar esta melodía de la cabeza, o esta música. In this thorn is a trap, dice, me está hueveando. It's a person that couldn't do anything.
This is one particularly funny example that we found. This might have been somebody who was just tired of our experiment, which was a bit long, I guess. And in the end, they decided that the interpretation being very difficult, they just went ahead with all honesty, and they said, you know what, I have no idea, but here, take a cat. That was funny.
Yeah.
Right, so in this case, for example, we have the it's not a very typical example, of course, but it's very interesting to analyze. What happened that led this person to believe that there was no possible interpretation of what was being given to them? So first of all, let's see. The level of schematicity of both wedding and wife seems to be parthenomic. So nothing really, weird about that. But then the difficulty of interpretation is considered to be very, very difficult. And the convergence of interpretation is also part of very divergent answers, because weirdly enough, there were people who actually gave very coherent responses to the prompt that was given. This wedding is a wife. And finally, in terms of metaphoricity, we can see here that absolutely no interpretation was made, and so we can say that no metaphoricity at all emerged from this kind of response. And finally, what we hope to do with the results that we have found is that we want to run them first through a statistical analysis, which will reveal to us the degree of convergence of the interpretations that were given, the difficulty of interpretations depending on the many factors that we have mentioned, and finally what type of interpretation were chosen for different sources, different targets, and different metaphors. And finally, the qualitative analysis, which might give us some very interesting insights as to the nature of sources, the nature of targets, and how these two combine in order to create what we see in everyday life, which is very, very important, which is metaphor. So that's it, and thank you very much for your attention.
Después de esta presentación, ahora damos paso a una ronda de preguntas. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Mostraron hace un rato atrás en una de las slides esta imagen de la serpiente con características y la mujer abajo, esa justamente. Estaba pensando, me imagino que cuando ustedes vieron los resultados de todo el trabajo que hicieron, las personas que dieron la respuesta, o ustedes en las respuestas pudieron ver si es que había alguna tendencia a relacionar conceptos con alguna característica, porque al final de todos ¿se mantenía eso o las personas tendían a escoger diferentes características del target?
Mira, por ahora estamos haciendo los análisis, pero se espera que en realidad pase eso mismo que tú dices. En realidad hay conceptos que tengan un mayor grado de convergencia en cuanto a la interpretación. Por ejemplo, cuando la Steffi hablaba del joke, cada cosa que sea puede ser un joke. El computador es un joke, las jornadas son el joke, esto es un joke. No, pero el joke es a joke. Tenemos ¿cómo se llama? Concepto que tiene un espectro grande. Entonces muchas respuestas van a converger. Esto es lo que esperamos en algunos conceptos. Otros que son más complicados, como concretos, por ejemplo, thorn. Algunos que estaban demasiado complicados. Yo les veía las caras y era como, no, esto es imposible. Y de verdad es imposible, porque este tiene un nivel de esquematicidad que es mayor, por lo tanto, o sea, menor, por lo tanto es más complicado lograr una interpretación con estos conceptos. Pero claro, buscamos como ciertos patrones en cuanto a la interpretación.
También un caso curioso que vimos que Viper no siempre estaba como matched con wife, pero estaba, por ejemplo, this trap is a viper, this viper is a wedding, y siempre había como, bueno, varias veces de las que me tocó a mí como ver, Viper estaba igual asociado a una mujer. Entonces, aunque no tuviera wife puesta en la metáfora, las personas igual al tiro hacían como esa relación, como no, es una mujer que es malvada, una mujer engañosa. Entonces, eso igual nos deja como nosotros como a pensar de que Viper en verdad quizás como parte de algo más. Por ejemplo, un modelo cognitivo idealizado de lo que es wife, que tiene como varios aspectos y que uno de esos es como que la mujer es mala, que es un cacho y que siempre es como un aspecto negativo de la mujer.
Bueno, muchas gracias, súper entretenido. Sí, justo, bueno, es la mala mujer, es la bruja. La bruja es la que contiene todo eso. Que es pérfida, es mala, te maltrata, te hace mala comida, cuida mal a los hijos, te hincha pelotas y además tiene una lengua viperina, eso lo tenemos nosotros. Pero es interesante que, ya entiendo que lo que están hipotetizando es que hay un scope que lo manda la fuente. La fuente te tira un rango. Y de eso, la meta te establece cuáles son las posibles características. Pero en este caso particular es súper entretenido porque la característica, que es como ser venenoso, es metafórica en sí misma.
Sí.
Porque el resto es invertebrado, porque claro, tú decías como, bueno, no es invertebrada, no es larga, no es esto, pero tampoco es venenosa. Entonces, para resolver que el rasgo es venenosa, tenés que resolver que venenoso es en sí mismo la metáfora para qué exactamente. ¿Cachai? Es la lengua viperina, la mina venenosa es la mina que el insidioso, ¿cierto? La maldita lisiada. Es como eso. Entonces, además, finalmente, entonces, ¿cómo resolverían? ¿Cómo entra en esta estructura la posibilidad de que efectivamente algunos rasgos de los que ustedes cuentan que sean los alientos, los que arman la conexión metafórica, sean además metáforas en sí mismas? ¿Cómo se resolvería? Tienen que armar como una misma estructura, como una especie de cláusula implicada, así como de... ¿Cómo?
Creo que hay algunas que son más fáciles de resolver por el simple hecho de que forman parte de, como decía Stephanie, de modelos cognitivos idealizados que ya están bastante entrenched, ¿cómo se decía eso? Se me olvidó la palabra entrenched. Sedimentados en patrones culturales y que se han repetido mucho tanto en la literatura como en la cultura popular y en fin, en el humor también, que son bastante comunes encontrarlas. Y creo que esas son más fáciles de dilucidar simplemente como procesos ya sea anidados o secuenciales de correspondencias metafóricas. Pero hay otros que serían mucho más complicados y que de hecho nos hemos encontrado con algún par de preguntas que son súper extrañas, que de repente nos dicen cosas como, por ejemplo, me acuerdo que había una que decía this viper is a trap, era el prompt, y alguien dijo en el juego hay una serpiente y no hay que ir ahí. ¿Qué significa eso? No lo sabemos, porque lamentablemente la estructura conceptual de la persona que respondió eso no tiene una referencia clara, primero, y segundo, no está tan sedimentado en patrones culturales. Por lo tanto, ahí se complica un poco la cosa, pero uno puede asumir de todas formas que se trata igual de procesos, ya sea secuenciales o anidados de correspondencia metafórica.
Vale. Una pregunta, quizás no tan relacionada con el tema mismo, pero me interesaría que explicaran un poco el instrumento que ocuparon para recolectar los datos, porque por lo que vi al parecer los estímulos están en inglés, ¿cierto?
Sí.
Y la respuesta, y bueno, en la misma hojita donde responde acá están en español, ¿cierto? Eso es lo primero. Y lo otro, si la especificidad cultural, como tú estabas explicando hace un momento, jugaría algún rol. Entonces, si tenemos en el fondo un estímulo que está en una lengua y que por lo tanto yo creo que ciertas expresiones se toman también de esa cultura y la interpretación estaría en castellano. ¿Cómo se maneja eso?
Bueno, con el tema del diseño del experimento, básicamente nos saltamos por el tema del tiempo, pero nosotros nos enfocamos en la taxonomía que ofrecía Kubiches en su libro A Practical Introduction to Metaphors, en donde él dice que son conceptos, dominio y fuente como comunes. Entonces, de ahí nosotros tratamos de como armar, si hay como la metáfora primaria, por ejemplo, las personas son animales, o la sociedad con el tema de la salud, enferma, etc. Entonces nosotros es como que entre nosotros hicimos distintas metáforas, construcciones metafóricas. Entonces después de eso vimos que lo que queríamos hacer era como cada concepto mapearlo a otro, para que funcionara como source y como target. Entonces básicamente como que los mezclamos todos. Y de 5 metáforas originales salieron muchas. Entonces, ya, el tema fue que nosotros dividimos la prueba como en 6 secciones, para que nadie tuviera que ver con algo repetido. O sea, los conceptos se repetían igual, porque son 5 metáforas, ¿no? Pero las combinaciones no se iban a repetir. Entonces, de ahí tenían que responder, marcar el grado de dificultad, y claro, después venía la pega de nosotros del tema de analizar qué target, o sea, qué función del source está ahí, etc. Y lo otro...
Respecto a la lengua, creo que fue bastante acertado, por lo menos creo, desde la perspectiva que tenemos ahora, hacerlo el cambio de la lengua, porque resulta que parte de las instrucciones que nosotros dimos a la gente que participó en el experimento fue que la idea no era simplemente traducir la frase, la idea era interpretar, digamos, qué era lo que se entendía por la frase que estaba ahí. Y aún así hubo bastante gente que se limitó a traducir, y creo que eso nos dice también bastante sobre algo que podría estar haciendo ruido ahí entre la diferencia de código, simplemente. Y es interesante más que nada por el hecho de que cuando se plantea una idea en un código y luego se tiene que decodificar en otra, pareciera que hay algún tipo de pérdida de información ahí, que es algo que nosotros lamentablemente no nos podemos meter desde esta perspectiva, pero que sería interesante estudiar de todas formas.
Perdón, está el nivel de competencia también, o sea, en una de esas contestan mal, no sabemos, cada experimento no puede detectar eso, no es contestan mal, que es menos pleno. ¿Cómo controlaron eso? ¿Ocuparon un grupo de personas?
Sí, tomamos primero términos simples y gente que en realidad ni siquiera era del programa, le colocamos el significado de la palabra. Es, tanto es tanto. Está bonito.
Sí. Muchas gracias.